Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
Hey, What Next listener. Before we start the show, I want to let you know about a story coming up a little bit later. It's from one of our partners, SAP. AI comes at you fast. If you don't get reliable and relevant advice, your business might miss out. Whether you're looking to automate tasks or embed AI in your business processes, SAP can help. To learn more, head to sap.com/AI and stick around for expert advice on how to embrace AI with confidence.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is a Final Four.
On Tuesday, millions of people tuned into the Olympics for the welterweight semifinals in women's boxing.
For nearly a century, champions have been crowned at Roland Garros in Paris, but never quite like this. It has been a spellbinding...
Thai boxer Yayem Suwanafeng went head-to-head with her Algerian opponent, Imane Khelif.
So at this point, she's done a great job at putting it all aside and just focusing on what's in front of her, and that's what they have to do. They have to just put everything to the side, get in there, execute, and win this fight.
The fight went 3 rounds. Each round went to Khelif.
The crowd erupts as her latest combination lands.
At the end, she got a roar of massive cheers. Her opponent even hugged her.
Tonight, she did her talking in the ring.
I did not see or hear many people talking about women's boxing in Paris.
Reporter Rose Eveleth was in Paris this week for the Olympics.
I will say I did, when I was walking home last night to the apartment I was staying in before I left Paris, the fight was on. The Imane Khelif fight was on. And some people had stopped to kind of watch it. And I actually asked someone that was standing there, I said, hey, have you been following this? And he was like, no, what's going on?
Eveleth hosted the Tested podcast from NPR and the CBC. It's all about the world of sports sex testing, with a particular focus on track and field. And while they went to Paris to check out the elite female runners, the visit just happened to coincide with a brewing culture war that was taking place in the boxing ring. Imane Khelif, the Algerian boxer, is a woman. She's competed as a woman. But last year, the International Boxing Association banned Khelif and another boxer, Taiwan's Yu-Ting, from competing.
They say that these boxers failed some unspecified test conducted by a laboratory, and that's all we get in the meeting minutes. We don't know what kind of test was done. We don't know what it showed. And in fact, in the meeting minutes, they say essentially that this is a one-off decision.
But the International Olympic Committee stripped the IBA of its credentials and allowed Khelif and Yu-Ting to go for the gold.
And now all of a sudden people are saying, well, wait a minute, why were they banned? Should they be fighting?
Things really started getting ugly last week after Khelif's first bout against an Italian boxer who quit 46 seconds into the fight.
The sort of very online, internet-y people who are very committed to working against the inclusion of trans people in sports seized upon these two boxers. And so you have J.K. Rowling tweeting about this. You then have J.D. Vance tweeting about this, Donald Trump tweeting about this, and really seizing upon this as a way to kind of further their agenda around this sort of alleged unfairness in women's sports around trans athletes.
Here's the thing. These women are not trans. In fact, in Algeria, Khelif's native country, being trans is illegal.
all of a sudden, all these people on the internet have become experts in women's boxing that I suspect they had not watched women's boxing before or had any thoughts about women's boxing maybe before this. It's really hurtful to suddenly be told you actually don't deserve any of the things that you've got. You don't deserve to be here. And, I've spoken to a lot of women who have been tested in this way and had these allegations. And it's a very common thing that they say, which is that, not only are you getting people saying, frankly, quite gross things about your body and what your body may or may not look like and, what they think your body should look like, but also that at this, pinnacle of sporting achievement, being at the Olympics, people are saying, you don't actually deserve to be here. You didn't get here because you worked hard or because you're talented. You got here because there's actually something different about you in this incorrect way.
Were you surprised that this became such a big international controversy?
I will say that I certainly did not expect it to become such a flashpoint in this moment in the Olympics. And, on the one hand, it's surprising. On the other hand, unfortunately, it's sort of not that surprising because we haven't really learned our lessons from this 100-year history of sex testing. It feels like we're sort of having the same conversations over and over again, and we haven't quite gotten over the hump, I guess, around what people need to understand in order to be smarter about this.
Today on the show, for 100 years, professional sports have asked, what makes a woman? They still don't have an answer. I'm Mary C. Curtis, filling in for Mary Harris. You're listening to What Next? Stick around.
This podcast is brought to you by Slate Studios and SAP. AI is moving so fast. If you don't get reliable and relevant advice, your business might miss out. Welcome to Dear Artie, an advice column from SAP, where we tackle the tricky questions at the intersection of AI and business. Here's our expert, the technology futurist, Ian Kahn.
Hi, I'm excited to dive into today's question.
Dear Artie, as our company expands, so do our hiring efforts. How can AI help us attract top talent? Signed, Searching for Higher Power.
So, searching for higher power, one of the most daunting undertakings of an HR leader today is building a new team and finding and vetting new talent. This is a very time-consuming process and can take precious organizational resources. As a companion to the HR team, AI technology can be used to create job descriptions, analyze candidate resumes, and filter candidates into various pools based on experience, skills, or any other parameter. You can also use AI to match internal talent with positions available. Parameters for this can be set, rules can be set, that can all be done through the algorithm. There are so many things that we as humans could be not looking at that AI can do in a matter of seconds.
Embrace AI with confidence. Head to sap.com/AI to learn more.
This show is brought to you by Discover. Have you heard about Doublenomics? It's okay if you haven't. It's extremely niche and practiced by Discover. Here's an example. Discover automatically doubles the cash back earned on your credit card at the end of your first year with Cashback Match. That means with Discover, you could turn $150 cash back into $300. It pays to Discover. See terms at discover.com/creditcard.
This whole story started with the IBA, the International Boxing Association. Why is it at the center of this controversy? Could you explain what it is exactly, the organization?
Right. So the way that sports works is that every sport has its own international federation, right? The IOC, the International Olympic Committee, it's not feasible for them to run every sport and to determine the rules of everything from badminton to cross-country skiing to, skeet shooting. Like, there's just no way for them to do that. That would be like an incredible undertaking. And so what they do is they kind of organize the Olympics, but every sport has its own federation. And that's, FIFA, World Athletics for track and field. And for many years, this was the IBA. The IBA was the the governing body of boxing. And so as the governing body of boxing, their job is to make the rules for boxing. And that's everything from, how different things are judged in boxing, refereeing rules, all sorts of things. And that also, in theory, includes things like eligibility requirements. And this is one of them. Every sport makes their own choices about who is allowed to compete, what tests need to be done, if they are going to have gender verification or not. And that's kind of the IBA's job. Of course, it is no longer their job because the IOC has removed that authority from them.
Well, why did the Olympics split with the IBA?
The Olympics split with the IBA because in 2019, the IBA was sanctioned for a variety of infractions, ethical malpractice, sort of corruption, all sorts of things that the IOC basically said, look, like, you guys don't have your act together. This is not how we want sports to be run. You need to clean up your act. And so in 2019, they kind of gave them a list of things that they needed to do in order to maintain their status. And according to the IOC, they did not do those things. And so last year, in June of 2023, the IOC stepped in and said, okay, you have not checked off the boxes on this list that we gave you. So we are sort of taking away your accreditation, essentially, as the Federation for Boxing. And we are going to step in. And for the purposes of the Olympics, we will be in charge of boxing. So the IOC formed what's called the Paris Boxing Unit. Now, the IOC does not want to be in charge of boxing in the long run, right? They would like a new international federation to be formed, or for the IBA to actually make the changes, or something else. They don't want to be in charge of boxing, but for the purposes of this Olympics, it was sort of too late for a whole new federation to kind of be organized, and so they kind of took over for these games.
When did the IBA take action against these two boxers, Khelif and Yu-Ting? What did they do?
So in the spring of last year, I think it was March of last year, they held a meeting. And as part of the meeting, they decided that these two boxers, Yu-Ting from Taiwan, Imane Khelif from Algeria, that they should be disqualified from competition. And in fact, that their medals should be taken away from them. And they made this decision because they said, at least in this meeting, that these two athletes had failed to meet eligibility rules following a test conducted by an independent laboratory, is the way they phrase it in the meeting minutes. Now, they don't actually say what test was conducted or what the results were. And that's the decision that they take. And then basically in a couple months later, 3 months after that, that's when the IBA is stripped of recognition.
For all the controversy that this story has generated, when you look at the facts of gender testing for sports, it's not even clear what standards these two boxers are being accused of violating. We don't know what tests they supposedly failed.
I'm a science reporter at heart, and we don't have good science. And we are sort of speaking right now on the assumption that these two women have some kind of what they call DSD, differences of sex development. I want to be very clear that we don't actually know that that's true in this moment in time. We have no idea because we still don't know what test was done. We don't know what the test showed. We don't know what these women's testosterone level is. And so this idea that they have some kind of quote unquote male characteristics that gives them an advantage is all speculation. But even if that were true, it is actually quite unknown what the advantages may be around those kinds of conditions. Some genetic advantages are celebrated, right? Michael Phelps is an incredible athlete, and people, put him on the cover of magazines, and his wingspan, right? His inseam, his torso length are perfectly built for swimming, and that's all right. But of course, in this case, people think, oh, well, this is different. I think also the racial piece is really important. So in this modern era of sex testing that we're living in, all of the women who have been impacted have been women of color, and almost all of them have been women of color from the global south. And that really, I think, does matter because so much of this is based around speculation about how these women look and what a woman looks like. And there is a very, very long history of sort of racial ideas and racist ideas around who looks like a woman and who doesn't. And this idea that, women of color do not look feminine, do not look womanly. And we're seeing that play out here again.
There's also an element of geopolitics underlying this controversy. The president of the IBA is Russian and reportedly has a relationship with Vladimir Putin. Russia has been at odds with the Olympics in the past. And this year, because of its war in Ukraine, Russia's athletes were banned from competing in team sports, as well as excluded from the parade during the opening ceremonies. I asked Rose how much of this is about sports and how much is about something bigger.
You know, it's funny. I don't know that you can separate sports from something bigger ever, especially when we're talking about the Olympics, right? The Olympics is sort of this, it tries to kind of be both things, this sort of universal, everybody cares, it doesn't matter. But of course, you know, we're doing a medal count. It's a place for nationalism. And so the Olympics has always been sort of fraught geopolitically, right? It is a, you know, there's a reason why Hitler wanted the Olympics in 1936. You know, there's all sorts of history here in terms of geopolitics in the Olympics. But I do think that the sort of fraught relationship between the IOC and Russia, which has then now sort of extended to the IOC and the IBA due to the IBA's close ties with Russia, has made this an already messy situation even messier. The IBA is saying that the IOC is being unfair because they're trying to punish Russia because of the war in Ukraine and because of doping and all of these things. And then, of course, the IOC is saying that the IBA is intentionally sort of attacking the IOC in order to get back at them. And so there's just a lot of geopolitical wrangling that's going on here. And these women are kind of caught in between it.
Anti-trans attacks and the legislation to go with it have all been on the rise here in the United States. It's a predictable culture war issue on the right, as you've talked about. What is it about the right-wing backlash to this story that stands out to you?
I think that this story offers up a really irresistible, spicy headline, and it makes it really easy to twist into kind of exactly what some folks who have argued against trans people's inclusion, and particularly trans women's inclusion in sports, are sort of on their horse about. You can write a headline that says, and I have people in my inbox right now saying, you know, men shouldn't beat up women. And so I think that there's this way in which this story offers almost like the perfect encapsulation of this alleged idea around protecting women in sports, because you can say, we are protecting women from being beaten up by men, from winning an Olympic medal for beating up a woman, which of course is not at all what is happening here. But I think it just makes it really easy to twist into this perfect clickbait, sort of rage bait headline that it's irresistible in some ways to the folks who really are trying to weaponize, you know, this story into their fight against trans people, which again, neither of these women are trans anyway, so it sort of doesn't make sense, but that doesn't seem to matter to some of these folks.
You mentioned the headlines. We saw the Boston Globe, for example, put out a very misleading headline last week after Imane Khelif advanced to the tournament. It specifically labeled her transgender. How have you seen the media at large really struggle with this story?
Yeah, it's been a real point of frustration. And I would say that headline's not just misleading, it's, you know, actively inaccurate and in fact harmful, right? You're getting something wrong in such a way that is potentially dangerous for someone. And, you know, I think one thing that has been really frustrating for me is that I like to think that journalists, one of the things that is an important skill in a journalist is knowing when you don't know something and doing your research and doing your reporting and making the calls you need to make sure that you actually understand what's going on here. And it seems very clear to me from a lot of the reporting that that has not been done, that people are sort of confidently writing about something that they really don't know very much about, whether that's women's sports, whether that's women's boxing specifically, or whether that's the biology, sex biology, gender, trans folks, like all of that. And it also feels very reminiscent of things that I've seen, you know, in reporting on this story and the history of it for the past 100 years. It really feels like we have not learned how to get this right.
After the break, how the 100-year history of sex testing at the Olympics casts an even longer shadow over today's controversy.
This episode is brought to you by SAP. First, the bad news. SAP Business AI will not help you generate cubist versions of your family's holiday photos, but it will help you understand which supplier is best to help you roll out your plant-based packaging in Southeast Asia, or identify the training your junior project manager needs to rise up the ranks, or automate repetitive tasks while you focus on big innovations. So you can be ready for the next opportunity. Revolutionary technology, real-world results. That's SAP Business AI. This episode is brought to you by SAP. First, the bad news. SAP Business AI will not help you generate cubist versions of your family's holiday photos, But it will help you understand which supplier is best to help you roll out your plant-based packaging in Southeast Asia, or identify the training your junior project manager needs to rise up the ranks, or automate repetitive tasks while you focus on big innovations. So you can be ready for the next opportunity. Revolutionary technology, real-world results. That's SAP Business AI.
I'm Mary C. Curtis, in for Mary Harris. The International Olympic Committee has cleared Khelif and Yu-Ting to compete in this Olympics. But Rose Eveleth's new podcast, Tested, shows that the IOC has not always been on the right side of this issue. I asked Rose how far back gender testing goes.
Yeah, it goes all the way back to the very beginning of women's competition in the Olympics. Women are allowed to compete in the Olympics fairly early on, but 1928 is really the sort of year I'd point to as the first time women are allowed to compete on track and field. The track was really that's where real men competed, and to allow women on the track was sort of really controversial. And immediately you have newspaper columnists and people in the news and sports officials saying, that woman looks too muscular. That woman looks like a man. Almost identical things to what we're hearing today about these boxers, right? She's got too many muscles. She's too strong. She can't possibly be a woman. The woman who won silver in the 800 meters in 1928 was a Japanese woman named Hitomi Kinwei. And they wrote about her in the newspaper saying, she has all the power of a halfback. She should play for the Chicago Bears. And so from there, they start saying, well, we need to have a test. We need to make sure that we're checking these women. And so 1936 is the first year in which there is an official test on the books in track and field. They called it questions of a physical nature, right? They're very vague. Taking a page out of the IBA's book, being very vague about what that means, what those questions are, how you would answer those questions.
One of the most shocking parts of Tested was the, quote, nude parades used by elite athletic institutions for a couple of years in the 1960s. What's the story?
Yeah, so for many years, these tests were sort of ad hoc, suspicion-based. And then the governing bodies of sports decided that they needed to check every single woman. And so for this short period of time, there were, as you say, nude parades. Another way that they were referred to at the time by the athletes were peek and poke tests. And so this was basically what it sounds like. Women were asked to go into a room, get naked, and have someone examine their body to make sure that they were truly a woman. And we interviewed a couple of women who went through this, and they all said that it was just totally bewildering and very strange and obviously quite invasive to be asked to do this. The other thing to know about this period of time, particularly in track and field, is that these women were very young, much younger than the Olympians we're seeing today. These are 16, 15, 16, 17-year-olds, right? Because the idea was that, sure, it's fine for you to compete in sport when you're, basically a teenager, but you have to go then get married and have children and, do the wife thing.
Oh, wow. And then later in the 60s, you talk about the International Governing Body of Track and Field mandating a new exam. So tell me about the bar body test.
So obviously when they realize they can't continue to do these nude parades, not good press, no one likes them, they decide that they're going to turn to science. And this is this moment where genetics is really sort of blooming in the mainstream. And there's this idea that, your genes tell us everything about you. And they do this test for many years called the bar body test. And the bar body test is quite simple. You take a cheek swab and you look at the cells under the microscope. And if you have XX chromosomes, that means that you'll see a little black dot in the nucleus of every cell. And if you have XY chromosomes, you won't see the dot. And so that's the test. It's very simple. It's visual under a microscope. And of course, the athletes were quite happy to do this instead of having to have their, bodies examined, right? This is sort of a no-brainer for them. The problem is that, in fact, the test was extremely unreliable as a way of telling who is actually a man and who is a woman.
And even Barr said that the test shouldn't be used for athletics, right?
Yes, Murray Barr himself, the man who invented this test, wrote a very passionate letter to the Canadian Olympic Committee. He was a Canadian, and said, the use of this test in sports has been an embarrassment to me, sort of begging them to stop doing it. And they did not stop doing it. They did eventually change to PCR, a different sort of technique but essentially measuring the same thing, XXXY, which sort of has the same fundamental problem as the bar body test, which is that, some estimates say that 1 in 15,000 women have X chromosomal material in some or all of their cells. Your chromosomes are actually not the full arbiter of your sex or gender. The IOC is out of the business of gender regulation and sex testing. In 2021, they put out what they call a framework for inclusion. And they basically say, listen, we cannot be in charge of what the rules are for different sports on this front. So every sport has to have their own rules. And here's how we want those rules to look. And here's what we want them to be like. You know, you can't just arbitrarily exclude people because on what they look like. You can't assume that they have an advantage just because of, you know, testosterone or whatever it is. You have to do studies. But they themselves, the IOC themselves, does not currently do sex testing. It is all up to these international federations. And so it's very sort of case by case, sport by sport at this point.
Your reporting follows two athletes, Christine Boma from Namibia and Maximila Imane from Kenya. They've had a much different experience trying to compete internationally. What are their stories?
Yeah, so both of them have been sort of on the receiving end of eligibility policies from the governing body of track and field, which is called World Athletics now. And essentially, World Athletics' policies have changed over time, but they essentially say that if you have a certain number of DSD conditions, differences of sex development, and you have high testosterone, that means that you have to lower your testosterone level in order to be allowed to compete. And so if you are a woman like this, you're essentially put into a position where your choices are walk away from elite female competition or take medical steps to lower your testosterone level. And that can mean medication, that can mean surgery, you have a couple of choices. And so Christine and Max sort of have been put into this position where they've been told, if you want to continue running, you need to change your body in this way. Christine Boma is a silver medalist in Tokyo in the 200 meters, and she chose to try and take the medication and try and keep going. For her, sport is her world, it's her life, it's how she makes her money, it's how she feeds her family. She really relies on it. Max sort of said, no, I'm not going to do this. I don't know what these side effects are. And I think the other thing to note is that many of these women who are in this position come from places and are in positions where they don't have a doctor who can help them figure out what medication would look like. They don't have someone guiding them. Christine is quite lucky, and sort of by chance, her coach happens to be married to a doctor, which is sort of the way that she was able to get the sort of medical support to figure out how to do this. But many of the other athletes I interviewed for the series, even if they wanted to go through these medical steps, they were sort of like, I don't even know how I would do that. Who would I talk to? Who would I ask? I have no idea.
It's interesting because Khelif is fighting for a gold medal. Christine Boma won a silver, so somebody beat her, and Khelif has been beaten by women. So it's not as though these folks are superhuman. They are beaten sometimes. And in the recent past, I remember all the attacks on tennis star Serena Williams, who said she was tested over and over again. They had questions raised about their gender, when the only problem seems to be that they win.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. I mean, the folks who are so spun up about alleged fairness in women's sports on this topic only really seem to care about fairness if the people who they think are unfair are winning. They don't really care if they're losing. And so, yeah, you see this all over and over again, right? There are people who have DSD conditions who are running on the track who are technically should be under these policies, who aren't being asked to do anything and aren't really being enforced because they're just not that good. And so, I think you see this over and over again in all sorts of sports. As soon as you rise to a certain level, as soon as you start to win and you don't look the way that some people want you to look and look strong, and particularly if that woman is not white, there are suddenly all of these conversations about, is this actually fair?
So in a way, these women are basically pawns in this broader culture war.
Definitely. I think they're pawns in the culture war, they're pawns in this political sort of war between the IBA and the IOC. I mean, they're just really caught in the middle of a whole bunch of weird stuff.
And all they want to do is box and win a gold.
All they want to do is box. Yeah, right. Which is what's so sad. Like everyone else, they just want to come to the Olympics and do what they've been training to do. And they've had to endure all of this other stuff. And it's just my heart breaks for them.
Thank you, Rose Eveleth, for coming on What Next?
Thanks for having me, Mary.
Rose Eveleth is a reporter and host of the podcast Tested from NPR and CBC. That's the show. If you're a fan of What Next, the best way to support our work is to join Slate Plus. Go to slate.com/whatnextplus to sign up. What Next is produced by Paige Osburn, Elena Schwartz, Rob Gunther, Anna Phillips, and Madeline Ducharme. We're led by Alicia Montgomery with a little help from Susan Matthews. Ben Richmond is the Senior Director of Podcast Operations here at Slate. And I'm Mary C. Curtis, columnist at Roll Call and host of its Equal Time podcast. Find me on Twitter. I'm at mcurtisnc3. Thanks for listening. Talk to you soon.
Is your vehicle stopping like it should? Does it squeal or grind when you brake? Don't miss out on summer brake deals at O'Reilly Auto Parts.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.